Thank you.
Charlie, appreciate you joining. I know you've got a lot of experience building teams, as do I. It's something that I think we're both very passionate about. I'd love to get your perspective because, we've built teams for decades collectively,
Sure.
and it looks different right now than I think it ever has. So I'm curious, what elements are universal? What elements are timeless around building teams? What do you look for? And how are you approaching building a team these days?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Carson. So it is a unique world today where we don't get to meet somebody that we're working with. And I would never say working for me, but working with me, right? So in that experience over the last year, there's a lot more of that trusting your gut instinct on the video transfer of opportunity. I'm a person who holds people to that first, second, and third step from a follow-up perspective. Did that person do the follow-up necessary that was asked of them to really move forward constructively? I recently interviewed 8 people for a West regional position. And the reason that Ashley's her name, the reason she shines so much is she went above and beyond what I asked her and researched other people, connected on her own, and started to build her own momentum without having to be necessarily told by me that was the case. And one of the things in my career, one of the best, I'll mention the company, but one of the best solutions I've ever gotten the privilege to use is a company called Culture Index. And Culture Index was such a unique, we've all been through Myers-Briggs and DISC trainings and all those things. This survey segment was the only one offered, or I should say allowed pre-interview by the EEOC at the time. And then as importantly, you had to judge yourself on 2 questions. And I was so spot on. So my previous company at Tintri, we did this for all 35 associates. And we were just shocked at how accurate it was from a reading perspective into insights of ourselves. So, but back to your original comment, I've had to just trust that I'm number one, taking the length of time to make sure I'm getting good resumes and having good interviews. I have not made a decision this year around, okay, Charlie likes this person, but I need to have a consensus, a true consensus, because it's an experience for, in my case, 3 people to interview somebody and then come back to the table. And I know that sounds similar to the physical world of interviewing, but there is so much more dynamic you can get from a physical conversation. You could watch somebody walk into my old office and how they interact with people outside of the interview. You could watch their dynamics, even just from saying hello as they greet the receptionist and walk into a room. This is a unique segment. So for me, back to some of those basics though, if somebody's on early, it excites me. If somebody's got really solid questions and has done some research. And the last piece is if they'll truly follow up. And I will inspect the follow-up I've asked from those I've asked them to do that research with. Hope that kind of gets to some of your points, but it is dynamic.
Yeah, I love it, Charlie. Building a team, I compare and contrast to years ago. When I started out with AT&T, hiring and building a team, we had a charter to grow very rapidly in an organization that we were starting, and
Sure.
I enjoyed that. And what was interesting about it though was, you go back and forth between, obviously you see a lot of resumes and people have a lot of experience, right? So, you read, hey, I had X number of years of sales experience, and that isn't the tail of the tape. You've got to dig in a little bit deeper, to your point, and understand more of those experience-based questions. And I was also intrigued by how you cast that net and what specifically you're looking for. I'm looking for, how are people going to react and respond to the types of experiences that they will experience in the role that we're hiring for. So years ago, I was looking at, hey, this person has 20 years of sales experience. Maybe I should give them a shot. Then I started looking more at personality, right? So I would take chances and sometimes gambles on people that might have less experience, but they had this go-get-'em personality. They
Absolutely.
had, I can run through walls. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. But here's the other thing that you've got to look out for in that mix, is that it is one thing to come to the table with a lot of experience. It's another to come to the table with a positive outlook and a great personality. But what is that person going to look like in 3 to 6 months
Yeah.
after they don't get the kind of success that they anticipate right out of the gate? So that's why we challenge them with some of these experience-based questions. What are you going to do if, client that you need to get into shuts you out completely? What are you going to get into if you have a character conflict with a customer? Or, how are you going to handle, let's say there's a sales dispute and, you've got a colleague with whom you are, you're vying for the same revenue.
Sure.
These are things that a lot of sellers face, but we're not necessarily always interviewing about those types of topics. I think we could and should. I used to cast a really wide net too. When I formed I formed the hiring process at an organization several years ago, and would literally just do these open casting calls. And I think they were very bound by geography, and they were trying to do these things in silo. And I just opened it up to the whole territory and said,
Sure.
Let's just bring everybody in, figure out where they might want to work, what solution areas might they want to work in. Let's get to know all of them, see if there might be a fit, and then figure out where they are most needed, because they may gravitate more toward a certain solution area,
Sure.
a certain part of town, whatever it is. And I think the more we challenge ourselves to really analyze that, the better. I know I work for an organization right now that's changed our hiring dramatically. I was reading an article the other day about 25,000 people being added in my organization since the start of the pandemic that have likely not met anyone in this organization face to face. So, the culture is shifting. But what I loved about what you said, Charlie, is we're still looking for a lot of the same things.
100% agree. I forget at what point of my career path, but I was taught some lesson that really dug into, Carson, I'm going to ask you a scenario and a story. And what I want to gather from your answer is your specific influence on that story. What did you do, Carson, to make an outcome happen? And I watch people sometimes, they'll go to their top sales win ever, but yet their influence in that win was subtle, maybe even somewhat relevant, but yet if they're not getting to that element of what was Carson's real dynamic and how did he, in fact, make that sale happen, it's a little bit of a tell for me as I get through it. And I'm a conversational interviewer. I am not a here's 10 questions. I literally write down 3, and it's typically I want to hear your story inference into this, that, or the other. And I watch how they react to the point, and it's a redirect too, because they'll get somewhat off topic, and I'll find myself, if I've asked somebody 3 times in that one question, I still want to understand what your element and your true influence of that situation was. It tells me that they're not flowing conversationally well, or they've chosen a subject that they're taking a little bit of liberty, let's just say, to say they were a part of. So there's those little things that over time, I still use that. That was 20 plus years ago. But you just, as you go through a career path, you learn around the situations of how to help people either get to their pointed element or really, and the good ones, because they'll go, Carson told me the following 3 things about he influenced this $1 million opportunity, right? And if they include their team, if they talk about the success of others, but they still get the point across of here was Carson's point, right? Here's what he did. So those are just a few things that I still use today, and I enjoy it. Interviewing for me is not painstaking. I actually thoroughly like meeting people. So, and in today's world, you said something earlier that really makes sense. And 10 years ago, I wouldn't have even thought about looking for somebody for the West region that's out of Tampa, Florida. But in today's world, people are willing to make a move quick for the right career path. So you do have to cast a wider net. And we as interviewers have to be more open to, let's talk to the person. They seem to fit, and maybe they do have an agenda to get to the West Coast for something, right? So yeah, thank you for that opening question. I do enjoy the concept of building a team, because no different than the interview process, you get to know each other. And frankly, I interviewed this lady twice total, and literally I just feel like we're going to be very cohesive in our approach to business.
Yeah, so sellers, if you're listening, the feedback here is clear. If you don't necessarily come to the interview prepared to talk about some deal that was, wrapped up with a bow and brought to your lap. Be able to talk about maybe the deals or situations where you got kicked in the teeth and you learned and you grew.